Alright guys, welcome to the first Open mHealth Meetup in New York City. Give it up. Come on guys. It's the first one. If you haven't gotten any drinks or food, please get some in the back. I'm David Haddad. I'm the Executive Director of Open mHealth. I'm really excited. I work in this space called New York City. But welcome. And New York City is a co-working space. It was one of the first in New York. You guys should come here and work. So we have a few announcements to bring up, and I'll let Peter take it away.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Peter Chislett. I actually am one of the co-proprietors of this space. So if you guys have any questions about it, let me know. We host events like this all the time. I'm happy to be kind of co-hosting. It's great. So I wanted to talk about our summit. I'm working with Open mHealth on as a development director and also working in the community development. And we've scheduled as of last week, scheduled a summit out in San Francisco, which happens to be June 17th, the day before the Quantified Self conference and expo. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with the expo and Quantified Self conference, but they're opening it up. There are 2 days of kind of an unconference, and then the third day is an expo that the general public will be there. And if anyone has interest in any more information about that, let me know. Our summit's going to be a day-long conversation talking about how Open mHealth provides open access to digital health data. All day long, we're going to be talking with tool makers and other organizations that have integrated Open mHealth into their platform. It's going to be a very interesting day of proving out what Open mHealth has been doing over the past several years. We're very, very excited about it. Anything else you want me to say about that?
Sounds good.
It's going to be it's a free event as well. We're not charging access to it at all. It's if you need more information about it, we're going to be tweeting about it. The meetup will post about it, and also our Twitter feed. You'll be able to find more information about it. As the development director, I have to talk about funding. To keep this wonderful organization flowing, we're actively seeking sponsors. It has been funded by various grants over the years, and as of next year, we're looking towards sponsors in the community to help us keep the mission alive, keep it going, and to support events like this. We have a meetup, which David will talk about in a second, in San Francisco in a week or two, and also the summit and events like this. So if anyone's interested in talking to me about that, find me after the event, and enjoy your stay here. Thanks.
One more announcement, we're also looking for a software engineer, so come to me, you can go to this link. We're always interested to meet new people that's interested in working with us. Like Peter mentioned, actually not in a couple weeks, on Monday in San Francisco, I will be in San Francisco with our other co-founder, Deborah, Estrin, and Dr. Mike McConnell, who was one of the principal investigators at Stanford, who...
You just said Deborah instead of Ida.
Oh, sorry, I do this all the time. Yeah. So Ida Sim and Dr. Mike McConnell, who will be presenting. Mike will be showing a little bit of the mHealth Counts app that he worked with Apple on. And Ida will be talking a little bit more about clinical research. And so if you know anyone in San Francisco that is really itching to be involved in this clinical research, digital health world, please let them know about the event tomorrow. It's filling up. This number it's at 81. It's going to go up. It's almost at 100 right now. So and we're very honored to be hosting it at Rock Health. So for those of you who don't know who Open mHealth is, we are a nonprofit with the mission of trying to unlock the potential of all this digital health data so it could be meaningful in the clinical environment. We build open source software that helps developers use digital health data with clinically valid data schemas. You can go to github.openmhealth.org to take a look at some of our technical offerings. We provide a streamlined API to get access to all some of the most popular tools in the market, like Fitbit, Jawbone, Runkeeper. We also have the schemas up there and our Read API, which allows you to share your data with other people. And really helps. This is what makes Open mHealth Open mHealth. Tonight, the important point about tonight is that this is our first meetup. This is these meetups are going to be us in New York talking about open mHealth. We're going to be constantly bringing healthcare experts who describe their problems, the things that they face every single day, and we're going to be bringing engineers who are working to solve those problems and hopefully talking about how they're using open mHealth to solve those problems. But in general, this is going to be the typical format for this type of meetup. And also, what's really important about today is because about 10 days ago, Apple announced ResearchKit. So this is just a unique opportunity to take advantage of that announcement and this big news, and I think it's a huge step forward to really do clinical research at scale. So a little bit about ResearchKit, for those of you who don't know it. So in September 2014, Apple released iOS 8. They also released HealthKit, which if some of you have upgraded to iOS 8 or 7 or 8, you'll find that on your phone and you'll be able to connect your various tools to it. Just recently, like I said, 10 days ago, they released ResearchKit. What's really important, what I really am so excited about ResearchKit is that if you look at it, there's 700 million iPhones that have been sold on the market. Today, a really big clinical trial has about 10,000 people in it. In just the last 10 days, Apple, through ResearchKit, was able to bring 47,000 people to do clinical research across a number of different disease domains. They brought together a lot of medical institutions, really top-notch institutions, including Weill, Cornell, and Mount Sinai Hospital here in New York. It's Stanford, UCLA, and others around the world. They also brought some really top vendors like Sage, BioNetworks, and LifeMaps that really build these tools for those research institutions. They built some 5 apps that were released 10 days ago in asthma, Parkinson's disease, diabetes, breast cancer, and cardiovascular disease. This is the other way. So this is my janky drawing of how ResearchKit works. But the way it is, for those of you who don't know how it works, you'll be able to download these apps. You'll give authorization through your phone or through the iWatch or whatever to ResearchKit, and you'll sign some consent forms. You'll be asked to perform some tasks. That data will go to the cloud, and then researchers at those fancy hospitals will be able to take that data and learn about that behavior. And what's really exciting is that as more and more apps are growing in the market to be able to build towards ResearchKit, but not just to iOS, but potentially to other sorts of platforms like Android, and as more and more people begin to use these apps, we're going to start to see a lot more interesting insights coming out of this research. And we really think that why we're here today, why we're celebrating this, is because at the beginning of this process, we think that open mHealth can be the way in which that the data is being represented through ResearchKit. Tonight, we have some really awesome speakers that are going to be talking about their experiences, both in the clinical world as well as some of the ways in which they're solving some problems in healthcare, and talking about what ResearchKit could mean to the clinical research community. We have Dr. Dan Stein, who's going to, hey Dan, and my co-founder and professor of computer science at Cornell Tech, Deborah Estrin. So I don't know, who wants to go first? Dan, you want to go first? All right.
You guys all kind of know Deborah, I'm sure, or know of Deborah, but I'm kind of this guy who you're not sure why exactly I'm here. So let me take a minute to introduce myself and give you some context of where I'm coming from. So I currently work at Weill Cornell. I am kind of a strange training background, so I went to med school. I was a little frustrated with how medicine works, enthusiastic about technology. And so after med school, I enrolled in an informatics training program at Columbia and ended up turning into a PhD student there and doing a PhD in informatics. And that means I spent a lot of years in school. So I've only been working for real for about 5 years, even though I have some gray hair and a couple little kids. But the work that I've been doing has been mostly at New York Presbyterian Hospital. Nothing I say today represents NYP or Columbia or Cornell, which are the places that I've been at, but that's where I was. So I started at NYP, which is both Columbia and Cornell, And I was on the Columbia side for a while as a faculty member there and doing work with an inpatient EHR in the hospital. And for the past couple of years, I've been on the Cornell side working in the ambulatory EHR that we have for our physicians in their private practices. So most of my operational work is with electronic health record systems, trying to optimize them, help our clinicians get things done that they need to get done in the least miserable way possible, which is a challenge. And then for the past year or so, I've been working with Deborah. I had the honor of being on a National Science Foundation grant with her. I'm a co-investigator with her on a grant where we're looking at chronic disease, specifically patients with chronic pain, and how we can measure their behavioral biomarkers based on data that we're collecting through their smartphones. And then through my relationship with Deborah, I've been involved with Cornell Tech, developing curriculum for what's going to be their health tech track next year, and running a course with her this semester. So that's me. All right. So my goal for today is to talk a little bit about this splash that Apple has made, right? And I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of an academic medical center. The ripples have gone throughout the news media and stuff, so I'm going to tell you about the little ripples that have gone through my community at a large academic medical center. So here are some thoughts, and these are, everything I'm going to talk about today are kind of thoughts that I've had and thoughts that I've discussed with my colleagues in my institution. I also, just in preparation for this, like when they released those apps, I installed a few of them on my phone, and I've been a research subject using some of these apps myself. So I'm going to focus on these things, and I'm kind of realizing right now that wasn't the best place to position this because that's not the part of me where these thoughts are coming from. It's more the brain part. Anyway, all right. So first, I want to talk about all the buzz, and this was another. Sometimes I was like Google image searching. Do you know that people do this? This is like a thing. There are like contests where beekeepers they weigh themselves with how many bees they have on. If you Google image search bees on people, you'll find a lot of horrifying images. And my slides are just images, so you can look at them and listen to me if you want. So let's talk a little bit about the buzz. This is every time Apple has an event, there's always a lot of buzz, but usually the buzz is about some piece of hardware that they released. This is the first time that the buzz sort of has affected me in my professional role, because I've been getting emails in my operational role from researchers at my institution saying, hey, this is really cool. Can we do this? Do we have developers that can do this? So it's a new kind of buzz for me and some of my colleagues. And I think that the primary driver of that buzz is what was shown in that slide before, which is just the sheer number of participants that these few researchers were able to get after Apple's announcement, right? So I think the day after it was announced and the apps were released on the store, Stanford has like a cardiovascular health app, and they said the next day they had 11,000 people who signed up to be subjects for that study. Similarly, there's a Parkinson's app. And I think the guy, one of the folks who runs that group who made that app said, overnight we had 7,000 patients enrolled in our Parkinson's study, and the largest Parkinson's study before that only ever had, I'm not remembering the number, but it was less than the number that they got overnight from this app thing. So a huge factor in generating that buzz is just the fact that so many patients enrolled so quickly in that study. And it makes sense. Traditional enrollment in research studies is not that easy, right? We have very old-fashioned methodologies for getting patients enrolled. So we mail things in the mail, like, would you be interested in that? And there's reasons for that. We're not really allowed, as someone who kind of does research, and I also have my hands in the IT systems, I'm not really allowed to find good patients and then call them up and ask them if they want to be on a research study. They have to find us, and that's because of privacy rules and things like that. So we do everything we can. We build alerts into our EHR so that if a patient qualifies for a study, it tells the doctor, so that then when the doctor is interacting with the patient during their encounter, they might recommend or suggest that they join the study. Because it's their doctor, they're allowed to do that. But there are tremendous barriers to getting patients enrolled. So there's no surprise that people are excited about the power of enrolling people. A couple other reasons why I think there's a lot of buzz about this, and even that buzz is happening in an academic medical center, is because through HealthKit and the connection of ResearchKit with HealthKit, this seems to researchers like an easy way to interface with other technologies that they couldn't normally get data from. So there are a lot of peripherals, things like Wi-Fi scales and blood pressure monitors and glucometers for diabetes that, through Bluetooth connection to the iPhone can send data to the iPhone, but it's not that easy for researchers to get that data. And so now there's a standard platform to collect that data, even though it's a commercial standards platform, which I'm sure you'll talk about enough. And now researchers can get their hands on that. So that's another reason for some of the buzz. And then as an informatics person, standardization of data types is always a challenge for us. No one can agree on certain standards. So again, one interesting thing here is that if Apple ingests all this data and says this is blood pressure, this is glucose, this is that, then we don't necessarily have to worry. The researchers who are using that platform don't have to worry about different standards for how you record those things. So that's sort of my thoughts on some of this buzz. I hope this will be interactive. I'm just going to try to get through some of my stuff, and then I think there's time for us to have a discussion afterwards. Another topic I've been thinking about, and some of my colleagues have been talking about, is consent, right? So consent is typically a pretty ugly process, and it's not necessarily the most effective. When we're running a study and we're recruiting patients, we sit them down, and there's usually like a 10-page consent form that we have to walk them through, and we either have them read it, and there's a lot of language in there that's gibberish because we're required by our IRB to put stuff that's very sort of legalese, and it's not always easy to understand consent forms. So one reason for excitement around the apps that have been shown so far is that they show a pretty slick way of trying to administer consent, right? So have you guys played with the apps? Anyone played with the apps? They've got nice little graphical things, little slideshow of what the study is about. They have a video. They have the capability to have a video. So most of the ones that I checked out have one of the investigators talking and saying, like, here's what the study's about. And there actually have been some studies that have shown that audiovisual presentation of information does sometimes help patients make better informed decisions. They understand that better than if they were just looking at a traditional consent form. So there's reason to believe that this kind of slick way of presenting consent is
Probably, I think it's the most transformational part of what they've already released.
Yeah. So I think that, and a couple of them even had a quiz. So that's another nice thing, is like after you read through the consent or watched the videos, it gave you a little quiz. The Sinai one, if I got something wrong, which I did intentionally, if I got something wrong, it kind of told you why it was wrong. The Parkinson's one was pretty harsh. Like if you got it wrong, it just kicked you back to the beginning and made you go through the whole thing again and then do the questions and stuff. So that was interesting. As much as there's enthusiasm about the consent stuff, there are also some concerns that have been raised by some of my colleagues and peers, right? So typically consent is administered in a face-to-face manner so that people who you're giving consent to, or who you're obtaining consent from, can ask questions during that session, and it can be interactive so that if they don't understand something, you know that, and they can ask questions right away. I watched a couple of the videos on these apps, and they say, if you have any questions, stop right now and email us, and then go and do the consent, right? So the lack of that face-to-face interaction is a concern. Something that was more kind of buzzing around in the media was concerns of eligibility criteria and how you can be sure that the people are what they say they are, especially when it comes to underage people. So a lot of studies, you have to be over 18 in order to provide the consent, but anyone can hit, yes, I'm under 18. In person, when you're recruiting patients for a study, you might check their ID or something like that. So there's some great things about consent, I think, and some concerns about consent. I've kind of been thinking about this on my own. I don't know if it makes a whole lot of sense, but I'm going to give it a try. I think you mentioned the appification of research, basically, and there are some implications there that I've been thinking about. So clearly, the idea that you can just go to an app store, download a research study, and get involved right away is appealing, and it's part of why people were so easily able to recruit real quickly. But I wonder about two things, and they're kind of two sides of the same coin. One is, right now we have 5 apps that are research apps, and they're highlighted on Apple's App Store. But let's imagine that when the ResearchKit is really launched and everybody starts using it, now there's hundreds, if not thousands, of research apps. How hard is it going to be for potential subjects to navigate those apps and find something that's relevant or of interest? And the flip side of that, of course, is if there's 30 diabetes apps that I find as someone with diabetes, how do I evaluate which one I should participate in? So is it going to be based on reviews? Should one of you guys start up a research app review website or something like that? It's going to be very difficult, I think, for consumers to figure out what what app to participate in. And the last app-related thing that I've been thinking about is that there's a mentality, I think it's more among Apple users maybe than Android users, of like sort of disposableness of apps, because you can download anything, it's free or it's $1, and Apple already vetted it, it's not going to mess up your phone or something, so you just download something. If you don't like it, you just kind of delete it and throw it away. And I wonder if that mentality will leak over to participation in some of these research studies. And I have a feeling, like, so raise your hand if you downloaded one of the ResearchKit apps in the past week or so. Now raise your hand if you actually like consented. Keep it up if you consented and enrolled in the study. Well, so there's only 3 of us. Now of you, 4 of us 4, did you actually like enter your stuff every day? Not so much, right? I didn't. You didn't, right? So that idea of like, oh, let me check it out because it's on the App Store, it's right here and it's free, but then are you really interested in it? That's something I've been thinking about with application. Data quality is a major concern. This type of distribution of research is not, if I'm going over time, will you just wait for me? I don't know if there is time, but 3 minutes? Okay. This is not a traditional way of conducting research, and one of the biggest concerns among researchers is probably how good is the data that I'm going to get out of doing this, right? So when a researcher thinks of like the future optimal research setting, it would be this really high-tech lab where everything is kind of like clean and controlled and there's robot arms and screens. It's all about control, right? A scientist is about controlling variables and controlling studies. And doing research sort of in the wild on the App Store, one wonders, am I going to get quality data? Am I going to get trustworthy data? I don't carry my phone because Apple tricked me into buying a phone that's too big to put in my pocket. So my mobility data that they're collecting on me, like how good is that? I'm not. As a researcher, I think that this is something that there's a lot of concern about. Okay.
Last slide.
It's close. And you may be wondering why I have this picture up, but one of my colleagues mentioned it's really nice that they got 10,000 people overnight. The question is, and it seems really fun, like a great night. I just got 10,000 patients, but you always have to kind of wonder about the aftermath of having a really great night. Apps are cool, and this is what my colleague Tom said. Apps are cool, but the infrastructure, the enterprise research infrastructure is not that cool, but it's maybe more important. So they've got 10,000 patients doing apps, but is that data flowing into the clinical trials management system that we have to use in order to run our trial in a way that's okay and standardized and under regulatory approval and that kind of thing? So I don't know that academic research centers are prepared to deal with this flood of data yet. Now that's, maybe this is a good way to get them excited to be that way. I'm not really going to talk about privacy other than to say that I'm so sad that my children's social security numbers have been leaked because of that Athena thing, and like it's just, clearly this is a concern, and clearly this is something that we all have to work hard to figure out how to make people comfortable when they're dealing with privacy. So just to close, because I'm out of time, I have some warm, fuzzy thoughts about what has been going on with this ResearchKit stuff. I think it's great that the work that Deborah and her colleagues and you guys have been doing has gotten this sort of boost of publicity. I think and that was the positive spin I tried to put on it when we first talked about it. I still have some things that make me a little uncomfortable, like those bee pictures make me very uncomfortable. So like the privacy and security, there are some ethical kind of human subjects questions that I'm not sure I can trust Apple to think through properly, and I think that researchers have spent a long time thinking about that stuff. And there are some dreams I still have that I don't think are realized by what Apple's done. One example that I've been thinking about is it's really too bad, this is related to social security numbers, that we don't have a universal health ID that's not our social security number, because if everybody's going to start participating in all these research apps, it would be nice if you could link data from the same person doing multiple studies, because we would get so much more from it. So that's kind of a dream of mine that maybe you guys can work toward. And I think I'll stop there. I want to thank Tom Campion, Adam Sheriff, and Kirk Cole, who are my colleagues who I've discussed these things with, and pass it over to Deborah. Thank you.
So it's wonderful to see you all here in my relatively new home. Been here for 2 years. Maybe went to New York first. Led the charge of Open mHealth moving east. And I am at Cornell Tech. I'll say a little bit more about that later. I want this mostly to be about Open mHealth, but to tell you a little bit about what we do at Cornell Tech in my small data lab and with great collaborators like Dan Stein in this space. But I want to start with just focused on ResearchKit and its relationship to it. So I will say, as an Android user, my first reaction when I heard about ResearchKit wasn't particularly mature. It was sort of, what, we're going to start doing clinical studies with only half the population of smartphone users even being eligible, and that half of the population is the population that can choose a phone that is twice as expensive. That is something odd about that in terms of how we try to understand clinical studies. It reminded me of when I first met an incredible woman named Florence Hazeltine in Washington, D.C. She was at NIH for a very long time, and when I was introduced to her, her brother introduced me to, and he said, this is the woman who, before she came to Washington, D.C. in the 70s, even all the rats that they used at NIH were male. So she helped rewrite the legislation that started saying, you know, you might have more controlled studies and your statistics are easier if you just study men. Control, right? But that isn't exactly equitable. So we've come a long way since then to try to make our understanding of research and recognizing that there are gender and ethnic and all sorts of differences in the world and phenotypes and socioeconomic levels, and this is not, we can't just let that go by the wayside and leave off all the Android users. So that was my first sort of snarky, not very positive reaction. And a young colleague of mine at Cornell Tech, who has a startup in this space called Paragon Measures, said to me, Deborah, it's when somebody half your age has the mature response, you know you're in trouble. He said, Deborah, overnight the world understands what we do. And that's the right response, and that's the mature response in all this. And yes, so Apple has sort of, in overnight, shown the world several things. That the data from your smartphone and your devices can have clinical significance, and that we can start to do the research studies needed to show that clinical significance and to use that clinical significance by reaching out to general consumers. And they did it in a way with a lot of, while there are issues, but with a lot of thought put into exactly that trickiest part of that consent. And they took, major steps ahead in terms of making that consent process understandable, as opposed to just full of legalese that even if you're facing a person and saying yes, probably doesn't mean that you actually understand what's written there.
Although there's still a link to that form.
Yes, there are still lawyers that still, that needs to happen. So, so it's an incredible start. Now, of course, we as the community need to do the work to get the other half of the population on board with that, and that's not a problem. And Apple has made it very clear that they're not trademarking, like there's not IP in the notion of HealthKit and ResearchKit. It's obviously not their job to make this happen for Android users, and all the sorts of iconography and middleware layer of how do you describe consent can all be reused, because everything that Sage BioNetworks has done is all open source and open IP. So that's a really great beginning, and a lot of that work was actually funded by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, who has also funded Open mHealth from its inception. So now what is there to do? A big element of where Open mHealth fits in and the work that we need to do is to take these raw data streams. Sure, there are devices that measure standardized clinical measures, blood glucose, blood pressure, these standardized measures that you guys might still be arguing about how to represent it, but they're pretty relatively clear. There are a lot of newer things, whether it's the tapping or the cadence of your walking. In the Parkinson's app, they have you walk for 20 steps, right? And they have you hum, and there are these new measures that they do in a prompted way. And there are lots of researchers who have, there's a growing community where people are trying to be able to pull those measures, the cadence of your walk, the evenness of your steps, from your ambient walking, not just your prompted walking. So one of the issues with diseases related to aging and diseases related to cognitive impairment is that if you tell somebody to do something, they can draw on their reserves and do it quite well. But if the way that they're doing their walking while they're doing other things might be the first places where you start to see signs of decline. So the community has a huge amount of work to do to be able to take these raw pieces of data and these messy time series over time and be able to pull out the equivalent of that resting blood pressure measurement, or the equivalent of the HbA1c, the measurement that you use to see how somebody's, whether somebody's pre-diabetic or how diabetic they are. So Open mHealth has a very important role to play as this vibrant community, now really catalyzed by the fact that the world now knows that you can do this, and Apple is helping to make that happen, that there will be so much work in this space. How do you represent in a systematic way those clinically meaningful data points that you pull out of these data streams? And Open mHealth does that in its data schemas. It makes these things available through standardized APIs, and really we've now had this sort of turbocharge. You said opening the floodgates to the clinical research centers. It's not just for research, because ResearchKit for research will also lead to HealthKit coming in and informing the care that people get during their everyday life as they manage their chronic diseases and their hopefully increasing health. So what else did I want to point out? Let me just say a few more words about what we do at Cornell Tech. We have built we have an exploratory system that's all built on Open mHealth standardized data storage unit and the Open mHealth standards that we use to engage with clinicians around the city and other places to do their initial explorations of how might I, as somebody who works with rheumatoid arthritis, or works with lupus, or works with migraine, or works with depression, or works with bipolar, or Crohn's disease, all these chronic diseases that have so much, that play out so much in people's everyday life. And they are all trying to develop ways of using the fact that people have these on them to both take data from them in the ResearchKit way, as well as in the way that ResearchKit does, give them tools. This is both a source of data and it's a source of interaction. And so when you're first trying to do this, you have to do smaller scale experiments. You don't want 10,000 users, right? We all know we're in a startup ecosystem. You want to fail fast, and you want to iterate while you're small enough to really make changes. And so we also have on GitHub something we call Homage OMH, which is a data store that allows you to upload mobility data from either iOS or Android, mood data, as well as script whatever kind of self-report you need as a part of your study. And then because it's all OMH based, all the data streams that Open mHealth already supports, be it Fitbit or other existing consumer devices, can come in and play as well. Because for some of the patients you're trying to reach, either in a study or for clinical treatment on some new product you might have. For example, you might be doing some innovation in physical therapy, and you want to do telephysical therapy and have people engage more, and that's your startup concept. There are a number of these out there in the startup land, and their data is going to come from an iPhone, an Android, or a Fitbit. And you don't want to have to rebuild to all those things. You can use Open mHealth to be able to start with all those devices and future-proof to the device that will come out next year. So at Cornell Tech, in the Small Data Lab, we do a lot of this exploratory work with clinicians. And we also work with data streams that aren't necessarily from mobile, but similar in idea, like using language features coming out of your email, or using data that comes out of things like your food purchases in other contexts that are sort of upstream of health. The last thing I want to say about Cornell Tech, Dan mentioned that we have a health tech hub, and we have a brand new master's degree program that will close applications in April, and it's for a 2-year master's program that combines 3 things. It's a master's degree effectively in computer science, so it's for people who are technically based. It gives you during those 2 years, that's interleaved with learning and exposure to health and healthcare. It is not a trivial, we don't need it anyway. It's not a trivial context in which to innovate. You can't just reason for first principles and say, this seems broken, and let me go out and build an app to make it happen, you'll be yet another one of those apps out there that gets downloaded by a few people and not used very much. To make meaningful change, you need to work with people who understand the clinical system, who understand the disease context, and who understand what it is to be a patient in that space. And the third element of this degree is entrepreneurial training. So all of our work is very hands-on, experiential, and students work in mixed teams between engineering and our one-year tech MBA program. So had to get in my other advertisement.
That's great. Thank you. I'm open up for Q&A because I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions. I want to ask the first question, and then if you guys wanted to ask a question, just stand up, say what your name is, sort of your affiliation, and ask away. So all this is happening, Dan and Deborah, with ResearchKit. I mean, you talked about this entrepreneurial program. How do you imagine companies in New York or elsewhere making money from ResearchKit? Through ResearchKit, or, is there an opportunity to be able to make money from this?
I don't know how to make money because I'm an academic, but I can tell you that, like I said, I've been getting emails all week from investigators at my organization, and I don't know if this is sad or funny or makes me proud, but my CIO is forwarding those emails he's getting to me because I work with Deborah, so clearly I would know how to support their needs with ResearchKit and stuff like that, but frankly we don't have institutional knowledge or resources in terms of how to build apps like this in an agile manner and stuff. So I think there's probably an opportunity there. I just don't know exactly how you do the business side of it. But.
So I think it's a little bit of a trick question, right? So in order to have a successful business in the context of health tech, and if you say that it's going to be a payer an insurance provider is going to pay for this, because it is going to, over the course of 3 years, reduce the number of their subscribers and covered individuals who become diabetic or pre-diabetic or whatever is the other, or become dependent on opioid-based painkillers or whatever is that process. And you have a business model in place that you can actually come up with reasonable estimates of how much money will be saved, and you could make that argument. The insurance providers would have to pay for all that research at this point, for all the number of those stories that you can make that sound like credible business plans, but you need to come with actual evidence, right? There are lots of things we can reason about, and there are a ton of reasons why in the end these things don't work out, or other things work out better than we expected. And so in order to build a business in health tech and in the consumer part and patient-facing part of health tech, you by and large need to come with a product and with some evidence. And so ResearchKit is going to be an incredible enabler to letting people get past the burdens that academics have put up, right, for a long time that made it really difficult. At the same time, let us not be fooled. What makes it so hard and why there have been fewer patients in Parkinson's studies in the past, let's not worry about the controls. It's sort of easier to find controls, right? But there's no point in having, right, orders of magnitude more controls than you do actual subjects. How many of the 10,000
they don't say. Yeah.
Or actually have Parkinson's? And the hard part about running clinical study is that to determine that this is a good measure of something, or that this is a good tool for something, you have to start out by getting some clinical measures that shows that it actually is. And that's a high-touch process, and that just costs money. You just can't do that virtually. So,
and our typical source of money for that type of work is through grants, and so not
right.
necessarily. So
right.
Maybe people will write into their grants support for a small consulting company to help them build that app.
That is true.
Yeah.
So there will
be an opportunity.
Yes.
And similarly, to help integrate that app with existing systems that we have to use, like our EHR and like our clinical trials management system. There's probably some opportunity there, but I don't know that we're talking about like megabucks.
But if you want to do health tech, this will help you generate your evidence, and the health systems themselves see this coming. They see their patients walking in with these devices and wanting to use them, and they're trying to figure out how to integrate that into their process. And at this point, they are going to small players, not just big ones.
Please, stand up or as you wish, whatever's comfortable for you.
Sure. So one of the things that I think is interesting about this is in some ways ResearchKit is a cross between the prospective controlled clinical trial, but it also, and that raises the question in a traditional prospective trial of who actually owns the data, not the program and all the other stuff which is open source, but if the study is funded by a pharmaceutical company that has hired a CRO to enroll patients in the study, the patients really don't have control over their own data, and yet in this kind of a setting, they are participating in a different kind of environment, which in some ways approaches a retrospective, uncontrolled trial, almost the kind of data that sites like patients like me have been doing now for some years and producing some very interesting results. So there's no reason why you can't do an open retrospective trial. For example, patients like me could do it today using ResearchKit, right? And just everybody could share that data and have access to it. So, and there's a lot you could learn from this, like in their case of finding out whether or not lithium had any impact on ALS patients. So I think it's very exciting for that reason, actually more than the prospective double-blind trial, which seems to be the world that this is pitched at. But it has huge implications for doing retrospective, sort of open data trials where the patients actually have access to this data as well. So I don't know.
And all of the work they're doing, is that the approved apps and such do give the patient back their data. There is an API to their own data.
But do they get everybody else's data and the results?
No, and nor would that be appropriate across the board.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. So yes, and you do get access, which is not the case with necessarily with a traditional pharma study you would sign up for.
Exactly. Okay, and I just had a question. Since it's open source,
Yeah.
has this already been rewritten for Android, solving your
In the last 10 days, not that I know of, but the building I happen to be, we incubate in could have done it already.
Okay.
So,
But it won't be out till April.
Pardon me?
The ResearchKit won't be out in open source until April.
right,
Yeah.
That will solve your first.
of course.
So I'm a developmental neuroscientist. I study sleep and cognition. And I'm pretty excited about this because I've already been using these types of technologies in my research. But two things. I think that the comments about the consent are fantastic. I mean, that's what's really has struck me. And I just wonder, has this set a precedent for IRB, regardless of ResearchKit? So now when I go to my IRB to start to use something like this, whether it's this or something else, are they going to be more likely now to approve what I'm doing?
One could dream
of such things.
I mean, so presumably the IRB's approved these 4 or 5 apps,
Yeah,
right?
but not your
You could
Yeah.
use the consent and build an app is unless you've gone through IRB in your own institution. And so like say like Stanford can create an IRB and then their consent process and form and open source that to the world, and you could use that as well. And so you can go to your IRB, like we're using the Stanford,
Right.
or the Oxford, or the Columbia, or the Cornell IRB, our consent form. And that will probably
There's no guarantee, but it's better than it was before it happened.
It's kind of
So moving in the right direction.
right?
Yeah.
I think the FDA just gave additional guidance the same day that ResearchKit was announced. So I thought that was kind of interesting that
and then they're lowering the
they
bar
seem
to
to be
entry.
more open and
Yeah,
it's
totally.
all moving forward.
And my sort of like Peter and I were talking about this, is that like I think Apple's trying to build the credibility gap, in that they had the credibility with the FDA, and that like they built a lot of features on the watch, and that because a lot of those features would have to, if they actually release them, they have to be regulated by the FDA, which would cause, I think, they just couldn't release the watch. And I think that now I think they're able to kind of build the case as they're going forward that the watch and the phone and everything like that is actually useful for lots of medically oriented things. I'm looking at the glass wall, but
One of the things is e-source with all of mHealth, the fact that we can get data from the patient directly, we know it's accurate. And I think that's part of the story with the data, but also free consent. If we can validate that they're the ones, back to your point about can we prove that the eligibility criteria is enforced, that's the one restraint.
We have a question back here.
Yeah, I'm Estrin from Downstate Medical Center.
Can you please speak up?
Sorry. I'm curious about if you know what the original process was for Apple to create this and whether it opens the way perhaps for researchers to ask big device manufacturers to develop other things that are used.
I don't know the answer to. I don't know much about the answer to the first. There's a guy named Bud Tribble who's been at Apple for a very long time, who's another fallen MD, also a computer scientist. And so they've been working in this space from the time the App Store began. And it's been a long, serious process. They did an early attempt and got appropriate pushback in some things. I can't remember, it was with J&J. Was that an early thing that they tried to do in an app that they were co-developing with J&J. And so I think they went back, and both the move on the consumer wearables, on the one hand, brought together with them knowing that they were going to do something serious in the clinical space. So, but I don't have inside information. There'll be some book 10 years from now when somebody writes something about it. But your second question was, does that mean that they're going to be open to researchers coming and asking them to, telling them and suggesting what they need to do? I would say definitely not.
I did email them. So there was like a link on their thing. Are you a researcher and interested? I emailed them and they said, thanks for emailing, and they sent me a link to the...
Yeah, no, I mean, ResearchKit and things like that, the ResearchKit community, right? But that something else will happen in their mass-produced design devices. I wouldn't hold your breath.
We have a question back there, and Alegria. You?
Oh, yeah. Great. Hi, my name's Tom. I'm actually with a company called ProPilot that did my PhD at Weill, Cornell. My question was what would you say the biggest, I guess, rate-limiting step in doing similar research trials would be? What would you have said before them, or before
ResearchKit?
What would you say after? And I'm curious if that is even different.
So for me, it's not different, but maybe that's because I haven't. Maybe it should be, but my answer isn't different. The limiting factor is that to make most of the things that are new and transformative, you have to take it up a level. You have to move up the information food chain from raw data, whether it's step count or heart rate or voice patterns, tapping measures. You have to move it up to, sometimes we call them like behavioral biomarkers or functional biomarkers, things that you look at over the course of weeks or months that a clinician can quickly look at, that can go into an EHR, that can be examined across people. And to do that, you have to do small scale studies to figure out what is that feature you pull out of these data, what combination. It's not any one data stream. And that's just hard work that has to go forward, and we get trapped in this vicious cycle of somebody saying, well, where's the evidence that that's correct? Why should we fund a study to do that? Why should we adopt that? Why, as a clinician, should I start using something? It's an experiment, right? And yet, that's what we have to do in order to create the evidence to answer their questions. That remains a really hard problem. Just like the insurance payer said, yes, sure, something like that will help me save money. It will give my covered, individuals a better quality of life. But show me the evidence that it actually does that.
Alegria.
Yes, hi, I'm Alegria. I'm a recent PhD student from UC Irvine in support team. And I was wondering, do you think the quality of the data will be affected? Because before, for enrolling in clinical trials, it was a hard process. So maybe there was more commitment versus I'm just downloading this app along with Angry Birds. So, is there sort of a difference in the commitment and the seriousness and the sort of quality of the data that is it
100%, but researchers aren't stupid, and so people who are doing research studies aren't going to rely on just that. They're still going to enroll people and pay them and encourage them to actually be part of studies.
Yeah, I think they try to be clever and figure out what they can do with messy data as opposed to
That too.
more controlled data as well, right?
Yeah.
Sean?
Hi, Sean. Work in the health tech space, particular focus on the cardiovascular health. So I have a two-part question. So first part is around data portability and longevity. Now, Vince Cerf recently told us, one of the founders in NRA, like said, print out everything because you never know what's going to happen with these data formats. And in a sense, he's kind of right. Data formats, particularly in the medical world, are incompatible with each other. And I was curious about how you would think ResearchKit could help bridge this and mesh with what existing data is there. Is it even possible to have a long-term study like the Framingham heart study in today's world of incompatible data? Two,
No, wait, save it. Let's do one at a time because I'll forget the second one by the time we get to the first one. So, Vince Cerf, one of my favorite people. But if only anything clinically and in health tech changed as rapidly as our storage devices did, we'd be in good shape, right? But it's unbelievably slow. And so what he meant was it's not the higher level formats that you can just write a chain of translating software things to do. He literally is also talking about the storage formats on the media. So you better figure it, print it out because at least you have it can be reverse engineers from human readable to something else. So I worry, they are still constantly struggling about how to represent and ontologies and all this stuff. But to go from one format to the next is a matter of software and doing that level of conversion. I don't worry about it in the same way as the storage things. So we have the problem even just today in things being incompatible. And how do you translate from one standard for representing something to another if what you're trying to do is a cross-population study that needs to have these two things calibrated one to the other? Did you want to say something else about that? Okay, question 2.
Second part is about incentivizing people to keep on coming back to the app and entering data. So, given your work at the Small Data Lab, is it honoraria that works? Is it something else that works to keep people coming back? And kind of a naive question, how is ResearchKit doing it now? Is it non-paid right now?
Let me give it a try. So first of all, health is like a huge space and research studies are of different length. And then there's actually clinical care. So I think across the board, the way you get people coming back is you give them something that is utility. If they have a condition, give them something that makes it interesting, that lets them understand something about themselves, and that lets them understand something in the same way that games do that change over time. So HCI is a huge part of this in terms of things that are going to be longer than just research studies that have to do with clinical care, and then the research we learn from everyday patients out there in the wild will have to be as interesting as the other apps that we come back and continue to play.
But it's not in ResearchKit yet.
No. But that's
the future.
But it can be your current. If you're trying to do something, you have to make it something that doesn't just try to take data, but give something back to somebody. To do research studies, and you need those people to stay in to make that medical discovery, you pay them. And it doesn't have to be in ResearchKit, but people are going to use ResearchKit to have people contribute their data to the studies that they recruit in through normal ways, as well as with e-consent and other ways, and then figure out how to pay them. Maybe they'll give them App Store credits as opposed to paying them in dollars. There are all sorts of ways of doing that, but yeah.
I'll add one thing to that. I think, first of all, from personal experience, I was pretty motivated to participate in the apps over the past week because I knew I was going to talk to you about them, and there were still days that I didn't pay any attention to it because I was too busy or whatever. But I think we hit upon an idea a couple weeks ago meeting with one of our investigators that to conceptualize donating your data in the same way that you might conceptualize doing a walkathon or something like that. And I think if donating your data is super easy, when you're talking about passively collected data, like your mobility data and that kind of stuff, you may not have to pay people to do it, and they still may feel good about doing it, especially if they can just say yes and then not think about it again.
Right. But none of the apps are that way yet. But absolutely.
Parts of the apps are like that, right? So,
One in the back, and then one more. And then we'll close up for the night, and you guys should eat and drink a lot of beer.
Okay. I feel a lot of pressure now. I'm actually a physician who helped run a social network for doctors with about 300,000 U.S. physicians. And, you know, we talked about a lot of these issues, sort of doing the crowdsourcing for information. Those situations, doctors helped solve cases, but they were anonymized, so you never really knew what the facts were. In this case, I think I understand all the issues that you've all talked about. And I'm wondering why just approach the population. It seems like you're going after, you know, the biggest kind of solution, as opposed to working with already existing clinical trials, making them cheaper, gathering data that they can't gather ordinarily, setting up registries where through doctors' offices these things can be given out, these devices, patients can be trained, and then you know who they are, they can consent through the doctor's offices, and there could be honoraria through participating.
That's how most things happen. That's how most of the good research will get done.
Yeah, that's how it get done. They just
100% agree.
They didn't have time to set that up.
Yeah.
For the announcement.
Yes.
This is an enabler, whereas you know that market, that area has never been tapped. Phase 4 clinical trials are really clinical trials.
Yeah.
All that data, drug adverse event reporting, all that can be streamlined and expanded.
Yep.
Anyway, that's my
Really important, and agree 100%.
Well,
Did you have a comment?
yeah, so the other point that I was going to bring up was also about incentivizing. But I think bringing together incentivizing with this question about quality of the data is really important. I mean, today we do longitudinal studies where we incentivize the individuals to provide high quality measurements through paying them more money at benchmarks. And so you would develop apps, I would think, through ResearchKit that would do just that, that you would, you know, and that's how you could enhance the quality of the data.
Do we have a quick comment from Josh? Yeah, go ahead. Do you have a quick question?
I think the clinical side, just actual clinician, in terms of using it day to day, like the efforts also to try to explain this in like straightforward language to doctors who are probably the most resistant to using this stuff to begin with, and how to figure out and to advise them about which app they should be using to their patients for any given condition, because I think that's one of the biggest overwhelming aspects to begin with.
You can use my slide if you want.
I don't know. I've got bad news on that front, and Deborah and I struggle with that in our research, which is, you know, clinicians practicing in the current environment are not really desperately looking for new data streams that they have to keep track of. And so it's a hard sell. And that's why a lot of the work that, I don't speak for you, but a lot of the work that we're doing is trying to figure out how you take a lot of data and squish it into something that is clinically relevant and actionable so that the clinicians really want it because they need it to make good decisions. And that part of research, you know, ResearchKit's not going to fix that. That's the kind of work that Deborah and her lab
But it
do.
will help people do the research, including aligned with clinical trials, that will get there. So just hold tight.
Well, you guys ask each other more questions, eat more food, drink more wine and beer. Thank you all for coming to our first event. We'll be having this pretty regularly, hopefully every month. And don't forget about our summit and use Open mHealth as much as you can. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much.